Should be all set.
Am I good to start? Okay. Now starting the Thursday, June 3rd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Kane, will you take roll?
Commissioner Daly,
Do I do Bill Daly, Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, State of Michigan?
Commissioner Friedrich,
You're muted.
Your sound's off.
Here, Mount Pleasant, Isabella County, Michigan.
Commissioner Honig,
I'm here in the city of Mount Pleasant, County of Isabella, state of Michigan.
Commissioner Irwin is absent. Commissioner Kingsworthy is absent. Commissioner Kostreva,
Here, Isabella County, Mount Pleasant, Michigan.
Commissioner Leash is absent. Commissioner Ortman
Here, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Isabella County, State of Michigan.
and Commissioner Rise is absent. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second,
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is approval of the May 6, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Second,
Any discussion?
Yes, there is discussion. On page 4 of last month's regular meeting, we had that vote on the proposed capital improvement plan, and I abstained from that vote, and I was later informed that, I guess by Robert's Rules of Order or whatever, it was inappropriate for me to abstain. So I just think, let it be known that I guess yay or nay, and I would have voted nay against that proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner Kostreva. It does state that you abstained and it doesn't have your vote counted at all in either direction. So
Yes, and I'm not sure whether it can be or not, but apparently abstention was not an option. And had I had my vote counted, I would have voted nay.
okay, is there any need to amend the minutes for that?
We can't amend the minutes for input that's provided after the meeting takes place. I would just offer that if you are ever in a position where you're you believe that abstention may be appropriate, obviously if we can discuss that in advance of the meeting, that's preferable. But generally speaking, unless you have a conflict of interest and you declare it in the meeting, we would hope and expect that you would participate in the vote on a particular action item.
I made a mistake, Jacob.
It's
and,
okay.
That's okay. You
I just-
learn something about Robert's Rules of Order every day.
No problem. I just want to make sure everybody understood that as we move forward. And certainly it's okay for us to talk that out in the proceeding if needed to clarify the particulars of your circumstance. And I would also clarify if you do have a cause for abstention, that does require to not participate in the debate on the item, as well as not voting. So it's not just a matter of not voting, it's a matter of not participating due to a conflict. So just, we can always discuss that offline as well if anybody has any questions.
Okay, well, let's take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next item on the agenda is the May 6, 2021 work session minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Kane, if you can take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is the Zoning Board of Appeals report, Commissioner Friedrich.
Madam Chair, we did not meet.
Thank you. And next item on the agenda is communications. Mr. Kane.
Madam Chair, there were no communications in your packet, and we have not received any electronic communications this evening.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is SUP 2108 and SPR 2107. Mr. Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just note at the current time, our applicant is not on the call. So if the Planning Commission has questions that can only be asked by the applicant and you opt to defer decision-making tonight, that's within your right. I'll do my best in their absence to answer any questions that might arise. Our first and only public hearing this evening is a special use permit and site plan review application for 1014 Bennett. This property is zoned CD3 suburban with no special requirements. It has a future land use of residential. The applicant's requesting approval to install a concrete driveway at an existing two-family dwelling. The current and prior use of the property is as a two-family dwelling. The property owner and applicant is 3 Clark Properties, and the site area is about 1/5 of an acre. The property in question is located on the south side of Bennett between North Brown and North Mission Streets. Surrounding current land uses vary. There's a motel located immediately to the north, another two-family dwelling to the east, and single-family dwellings to the south and west. The future land use on the north side of Bennett Street is attached residential, while the future land use of properties to the east, west, and south are residential, as it's the case with the subject property. All of the properties in the immediate vicinity are zoned CD3 suburban. On the screen, you'll see a perspective of the property. This is taken from Bennett looking toward the south and east. So you'll see the subject two-family dwelling is located near the rear of the lot. There's essentially very little backyard and it's pretty significant front yard. The property was actually originally constructed as a single-family dwelling, essentially a house with a garage on the ground level. At some point, I believe in the 1970s, that property was converted into its current use as a two-family dwelling with the conversion of that former garage into a second unit in the property. And that conversion happened in 1967. The property is currently licensed as a rental for both units, and those units are family occupancy. The second perspective is looking from the subject property back out towards Bennett Street. So you can see there's a trash can and a vehicle in the background that is the Bennett Street curb line. The applicant's proposing to convert what has been a gravel parking lot, parking area and driveway at this property into a concrete parking lot and driveway. You will note that some excavation work has already taken place in advance of obtaining Planning Commission approval. However, upon discussion with the applicant of the requirements of the district for two-family dwellings, construction did discontinue pending your review tonight. Two-family dwellings are regulated as a special use in the CD3 zoning district, and as such, they're subject to Planning Commission review and approval when there's changes made to the property. They're also subject to a variety of special use conditions that apply to two-family dwellings in the district. In this case, the current conditions as well as the proposed conditions are consistent with those special use permit criteria for two-family dwellings, and as such, the property does qualify to obtain a special use permit as a two-family dwelling. On the screen, you'll see a site plan for the proposed work on this property. The applicant's not proposing to expand the area of the property that has been used as parking and drive area in a gravel state. So essentially they will be maintaining the current limits of both the drive approach and the driveway and parking in front of the building, just converting that existing gravel condition to concrete. Just in reviewing the plan complies with the submittal requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant's not proposing to make any changes to the existing two-family dwelling on the site. In terms of vehicle parking area, I did want to note, since given the location of the home at the rear of the lot, this front yard is very large, and there is a significant amount of coverage as a result of that driveway and parking area in the front yard. The code does require a minimum of 30% of a front yard in this district to be landscaped. That can be in the form of grass, trees, shrubs, or other landscape material. In this case, under the proposed conditions, 49% of the yard will be landscaped, so just over half would be hard surfaced. Lot coverage for the CD3 district, the maximum is 55%. That's inclusive of all coverages, sidewalks, driveways, building, patios, etc. The proposed conditions in this case would be a coverage of 47%. I would note the applicant's proposing to make some repairs to the existing driveway apron, which is a non-conforming 23 feet 4 inches. The maximum width in this district is 18 feet. Staff is not recommending that the applicant modify the driveway, given that they're only making repairs. If this was a full replacement, staff would likely look for that driveway to be brought into conformance with code. So with that, staff's recommendation is approval of the special use permit and site plan review subject to meeting the requirements of the Public Works Department. I'd welcome any questions from the Planning Commission on this case. Let me check and see. I don't believe anybody has joined us on behalf of the application, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have on this application. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any questions for Mr. Kane?
Confirming it will be concrete, not asphalt. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Any other questions?
Why are we not asking that the apron go back to code? I know you explained it, but.
Yeah, the applicant's not removing the entirety of that existing apron. He's just repairing areas that are in poor repair. He's done some recent work on the property in terms of the sanitary sewer connections to the dwelling, and that's partly precipitated the interest in while making repairs to the existing driveway to go ahead and concrete the entirety to improve the aesthetic and the maintenance and usability for the residents. So given that the entire driveway is not being removed, just a portion, staff's recommending that we allow that to be repaired in place as it currently exists.
Jacob, there's no landscaping requirement for this.
There's not. So this property is in the CD3 zoning district, and two-family dwellings in terms of their requirements are treated much the same as a single family dwelling, with the exception of those special use permit criteria that do apply here. However, having said that, the Planning Commission's within their rights in association with a special use permit to impose additional conditions of approval if it's felt those conditions are necessary for this property to be compatible with surrounding properties in the area and in the district.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Kane? Since the applicant isn't here, I'll open up the public hearing if there's any members of the public or public comment, Mr. Kane.
We do not have any electronic comments at this time. It does not appear that we have any members of the public on the call either.
Thank you. I'll close public comment and open up discussion.
Before we continue with discussion, Madam Chair, Commissioner Rise, if I could get your location for the record.
Mount Pleasant, Michigan, County of Isabella.
Thank you.
So to resume discussion, if anyone has any discussion or motion.
Make a motion that we approve SUP 2108 and SPR 2107 subject to the following condition: compliance with the requirements of the Public Works.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rise.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next item on the agenda is public comment. If there's anyone from the public that wants to comment at this time, this is the last opportunity to do so. Mr. Kane.
Madam Chair, we have no electronic comments at this time.
Thank you. I'll close public comment. And next item on the agenda is under new business, discuss amendment to section 154-410B4 of the zoning ordinance to update special use permit conditions and requirements for two-family dwellings, and consider setting a public hearing on this for July 1st. Mr. Kane?
Madam Chair, you'll recall that at our last two work sessions in April and May, Planning Commission discussed a variety of potential text amendments related to housing. The first item under new business tonight is a text amendment related to the special use permit criteria for two-family dwellings. Based upon the consensus from the last work session, the proposed ordinance would increase the minimum square footage of each unit within a two-family dwelling from the current requirement, which is 600 square foot per unit, to 1,000 square feet per unit. And it would also eliminate the principal residence exception requirements, which are currently included for new two-family dwellings within the CD3L and CD3 districts. So staff's looking for feedback on the draft ordinance, as well as the Planning Commission to set a public hearing on the proposed ordinance for your July 1 meeting.
So, so we're not going to vote on this. We're going to say it's worth setting a public hearing.
Correct. Your action tonight would be to set a public hearing for your next meeting, at which time you would hold a public hearing. And following that public hearing, you would have the opportunity to vote on the proposed ordinance, make a recommendation to the City Commission regarding that ordinance if you wish.
So by raising this to 1,000, is that, and people please respond, is that the idea is that if raising this to 1,000 means anybody who's building a property has to pretty much mean it, and they have to build a fairly nice property. And the rent will be larger than it would for 600. I mean, I know there's a concern of a proliferation of duplexes, and those all going to students. And so we, the public, would be concerned about that. And we're trying to get what's called a middle. Does the 1,000 square feet, the point of the 1,000 square feet, if I understand correctly, is to push those properties into that middle as opposed to near that student category?
The purpose of the 1,000 square foot was twofold. One, I did a sampling of purpose-built two-family dwellings in this district to see. So when I say that, I say a property that was built as a two-family dwelling from the outset, and found that almost without exception, those properties, each unit was over 1,000 square feet as it was composed. And those are properties that were primarily developed in the late 1980s to the early 2000s. That's really where you see the bulk of that two-family new construction occurring in that district. The second factor would be to preclude or minimize the opportunity for conversion of existing homes to duplexes. So particularly in some of our more single family oriented neighborhoods where you may have a proliferation of houses that are sub 2,000 square feet. This would mean not that those conversions couldn't take place, but that might require an addition to the property and as part of it. So just raising the threshold above some of the conversion activity that we have seen in the past in the city, where some very minimal investment was made to facilitate the transition to two-family, and it really wasn't accomplishing the goal of providing a high-quality housing unit for the ultimate tenants.
So,
No, I'm right in the planning commission meeting right now. Okay. All right, bye.
This would also be an opportunity to backfill the elimination of the principal residence exemption requirement, which was originally implemented as for much of the same purpose, to ensure that there wasn't a proliferation of two-family dwellings through some very minimal investment in existing single-family properties to simply like add a break wall and call it a day, and you've got a second door and it's a 2-unit. This kind of raises the stakes a bit and make sure that that investment is appropriate. And these properties would still be coming to the planning commission for review and approval for compatibility in the neighborhood. So there's still opportunity for the planning commission to be weighing in and to making sure these fit in the proposed location where they're proposed under their proposed conditions. But it might, I believe it could provide some confidence to residents that this process has the appropriate safeguards to make sure that these conversions are appropriate.
As a resident in a residential area, it's still the no more than 2 unrelated persons. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. For any of these conversions in a CD3L or CD3, it would still be family occupancy in the units.
I would like to just say I actually support this for a number of reasons. I would like to make sure that we also safeguard any of the existing duplexes that are under the 1,000 threshold so that they don't become non-conforming uses. I think that might be an issue for people who have duplexes that are on the smaller side or one of the units on the smaller side becoming a non-conforming use. Then if they want to say add their driveway or do any of the things that that might be an upgrade to the property, but they're non-conforming because they don't meet the size threshold. That would be my only concern with the raising from 600 to 1,000. So as long as that is in the new verbiage, I think I would fully support.
Madam Chair, I could, at the Planning Commission's discretion, include at the beginning of the new clause 1 in that subsection, similar language to what currently exists regarding the principal residency exemption and the exemption to that requirement for existing properties, along the lines of except for 2-family dwellings legally existing as of. And I would likely use the proposed effective date of this ordinance as that as of date. So this would, to Commissioner Rise's suggestion, legalize an existing 2-family dwelling that doesn't meet these conditions of the square footage per unit so that they don't fall into a non-conformance.
Am I correct that currently duplexes are non-conforming?
No.
That's that's not a yes or no question. There are likely currently a 2-family dwelling in these districts that doesn't have a principal residence exemption associated with it is not non-conforming because of the way the ordinance language is written. So on the basis of that standard, none of the existing 2-family dwellings that legally exists is non-conforming. However, any of those other standards, there could be a non-conformance issue as well as any dimensional requirement. So if we had a duplex that was situated on a lot that it covered 70% of the residential lot, that's a non-conformance issue. So on a property by property basis, there's likely 2-family dwellings out there with non-conformities that may include the special use permit criteria. That's always a possibility with a special use, and really with any property. I'm sure at least one of us on this call probably has a non-conformance on our personal property in some manner. They're not uncommon, especially the older a property gets and the more as the rules change over time. But this would at least exempt on the square footage, since that would likely be difficult or very expensive to resolve.
Will it come to pass, and I know I'm jumping ahead, if we remove the whatever that wording is,
The principal residence
yes,
exemption requirement?
If that were to come to pass, then people who are now needing to live in half of their duplex, they will be leaving or can leave, right? I mean, little confused about what is now and what they can do now and what they'll be able to do after this.
Sure. So the current language applies for principal residency exemption, applies only to two-family dwellings that were created after that language was added to the code. And in these two districts, and there have been no two-family dwellings created in these districts since that language is implemented. So the properties that all of our two-family dwellings in these districts are conforming in terms of that standard, because that standard doesn't apply to them. So that's not creating a non-conformance issue for those existing properties. So I get that question a lot. And in case anybody is listening, those properties that are currently carrying a principal residency exemption that are two family, which last time I looked at those numbers, it was about 30% of our two family dwellings. There's a principal residency exemption associated with them. Those properties can become fully rental. And a property that's fully rental could have a principal residency exemption and then go back to fully rental as long as it legally existed before the adoption of the current language, which was in February of 2018.
So the ones that have exemptions now are pretty much by the choice of the owner. They could decamp and rent anytime.
Correct.
Okay.
Or sell.
Yeah, this change would essentially create an opportunity for new two-family dwelling construction or conversion that's currently preempted by that requirement, I believe.
Could people turn their units into two-family units now? And they only have to do, now they have to have the principal residence exemption or whatever that is. And now they only need 600 square feet.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. But nobody has.
Correct.
Any other feedback on this proposed amendment? Commissioner Kostreva, you're muted. You're still muted.
And didn't know that I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We talk about families all the time. And we mention students all the time. But what strikes me, I see it in my own life, I see it in my practice here, is the graying of in the United States, the graying of Mount Pleasant. There are many older single people these days. And I wonder, 600 square feet, from my point of view, is adequate to accommodate an older person with reasonable rent. And to move that up to 1,000 square feet, that's an increase. You're increasing that size by a percentage of 67%. Okay, it's 167%. And where Mount Pleasant is at right now, we keep on mentioning families as if there are many families out there that might rent a 600 square foot apartment or even 1,000 square foot apartment. But what about the thing that I never hear here? And that's the 70 to 75 to 80-year-old who wants to stay independent. And maybe they've lost a spouse, or at this stage they're single. I don't want to price them out of the market. They're part of this as well. I have never really understood what's the matter with 600 square feet and in terms of a reasonable living area. And as soon as you introduce the two family concept, I can see where 600 feet is small. But if you look at just a dwelling unit for an individual, 600 feet is really a quite accommodative, easily manageable dwelling unit for somebody that's by themselves. I never hear us talk about a single individual. I'm not sure this needs to be changed from 600 to 1,000 at all. And even though it may have in the last meeting, it may have been lost on the, for one reason or another, I may have voted for it, but when I think about it, what's the matter with 600 feet? How long has that been in the law?
I'm I'm not sure. That's only been in the ordinance since 2018.
Okay, 2018, 600 feet. And you know, Commissioner Kane, and I have to admit, I've become more and more familiar, as some of you know, with New York City. 600 feet gets you a lot of living space in New York City, okay? And you can live quite accommodatively in a bigger city. I don't see what's the matter with it. You know, a well-built 600, a well-maintained duplex or 2-unit, small unit, well-maintained, doesn't strike me as being inappropriate at all. An ill-maintained large property, an ill-maintained personal home, and ill-maintained duplex disturbs me greatly.
I think even if we adopt this, we will have still in existence duplexes with 600 square or smaller than 1,000 square feet, let's say.
They'll be
And-
grandfathered in, won't they, Corey? Yes.
Yeah, there could be a couple living in one of these smaller ones who are having children now and would like to move up to a larger one. And this would accommodate them moving into a larger one and then freeing up that space for a single individual or another couple.
So I think by its nature, zoning is a fairly blunt instrument. You can't manage all the possibilities. I'm not saying what's better and what's worse. I have sympathies for older single people. I'm not single, I'm just older. But I don't know any way out of that. I'm envisioning, you know, part of this is built for the public relations value of even getting it through the public. We'll find out when we have a public hearing how much concern and ire or hopefulness that we're going to get.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to clarify as well that keep in mind that these standards would apply only in our CD3L and CD3 districts. So we have a huge number of 2, 3, and 4 family style units that are in our CD4 district, including a number of areas of the community that have a large senior population. And those areas, these special use permit criteria would not apply. So for those type of developments that might be lower maintenance, kind of minimized, designed with seniors in mind, this regulation wouldn't apply in those areas of the community. And so that may provide that outlet for smaller unit types if that is a market niche that's needed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to set a public hearing on the text change 2103 with the amendment that Mr. Kane made at our July 1st, 2021 regular meeting.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice? Commissioner Rice, you're muted. Sorry.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to discuss amendment to section 154-410B4 of the zoning ordinance to update special use permit conditions and requirements for accessory dwelling units and consider setting a public hearing for this issue on July 1st, 2021. Mr. Kane?
Madam Chair, this is the second of the 3 housing related amendments before you tonight. This amendment would adjust the special use permit criteria for accessory dwellings to modify the principal residence exemption requirement that currently applies in the CD3L and CD3 zoning districts and replace it with a requirement that at the time of application and approval, the initial special use permit application and approval, that the property carry a principal residence exemption, but not to require that on a perpetual basis. Based on the feedback that we discussed last month, I would just remind you all, I think one of the reasons why that change would be powerful is that in order for a property owner to obtain financing for an accessory dwelling unit, it's very difficult with a lender to obtain financing with a principal residence exemption requirement attached, because that limits the potential future saleability of a property and then decreases the value, which can make it difficult to appraise out an improvement such as this on the property. I've had some of those conversations with property owners and lenders over the last 3 years with regard to potential reasons why we weren't seeing people take advantage of this. To Commissioner Kostreva's earlier point, accessory dwelling units could provide an opportunity for older folks to stay in their homes, whether they're in the principal dwelling or in a smaller accessory dwelling on their own property or on the property of a relative. So this is a nice and an easy way to add some housing to the community that's affordable in a manner that's consistent with our existing residential neighborhoods. So the recommended ordinance change would modify that principal residence exemption requirement as described. Staff is asking that you consider setting a public hearing for your July meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any feedback for Mr. Kane?
So, okay, I have a house and I wish to turn it into a 2-family unit for whatever reason. If you've seen my house, that would be one of the dumbest ideas on the planet. Okay, so, okay, someone wants to buy my house and they have the intention of doing this. They go to the bank and the bank asks them, well, what's the principal exemption deal here? What do they then hear from the banker?
After they share the information with them?
Yes.
Yeah, so they're going to hear that that's going to lower the future value of the home at time of resale, because the pool of prospective buyers would have to be someone who plans to occupy and carry a principal residence exemption. And so when it comes time to get the appraisal for the loan, it's going to reflect a much lower value than what the construction costs of this type of project would likely be, particularly if we want to encourage a high quality development. The pricing I've seen for accessory dwelling units generally runs $80,000 and up for the accessory dwelling unit. So this is not a minor investment. And to add that value to a home that might be priced in the sub 200,000, that's a significant increase in cost. And we want to make sure that the property can appraise out so that people are able to do this since they're permitted. And so this would create that opportunity for a homeowner to add that unit to the property when they carry the principal residence exemption. It would preclude this being used as a tool to directly increase rental supply by adding a second rental unit to a property, because the property owner would have to live in the property long enough to hold the principal residence exemption, or the property would already have to have a principal residence exemption at the time of application. So that I believe that would be sufficient to ensure that the folks making these investments have the intention of, at least in the interim, the immediate period, of occupying the home or the accessory unit. Over time, they could become rentals, but this would prevent that from becoming the immediate use.
So let me make sure I understand. So I own the house I live in. I could use this principal residence exemption to build an accessory dwelling on my house, on the property where I live, as long as I meet all the requirements of planning. And if I sell my house and the next person that buys it, they could rent out both properties. They wouldn't have to live in it.
Correct. You could also, if 5 years down the road, you held the home, let's say you relocated seasonally, and you no longer qualified for principal residence exemption at your home in Mount Pleasant, you could rent both units and keep it under your ownership in the future.
Okay. But any future buyer would be able to not live in one of the properties.
Correct.
But the property that I own that already is a rental that I don't live on, I couldn't build a second accessory dwelling
Correct.
because there's no principal residence. Okay, I think I understand it, but I do think it's a little bit hard to understand.
I would agree.
And if can I say something here? For somebody that owns duplexes prior to this new law, none of these restrictions, this only applies to new housing. None of these restrictions apply to something that has been grandfathered in. Is that correct, Mr. Kane?
That would be true of any code change. Yes. If
Yeah.
you're
Only applies to new buildings,
no, it would apply to
new changes.
yes.
An already
Or-
existing duplex and already existing 2-unit. This law is, this set of rules is not going to apply to them.
Correct. Things become grandfathered in at a time of a change.
Unless
Yeah.
you were going to add an accessory dwelling to that duplex and you didn't live there, right?
You've already got a duplex.
Yeah, well, practically, you mean to make it into like a triplex?
Or just add another building to the property if there's enough property there.
You wouldn't be
Well,
able to have two
I don't know
principal
what the
buildings
answer to
on the
that
lot.
is. What is the answer to that?
You could not do that.
Yeah,
What I would, just to clarify, so what changes with this ordinance amendment is that currently to create an accessory dwelling unit, the property must have and must carry in perpetuity a principal residence exemption. Under
Yeah.
the proposed ordinance change, the property must have and carry a principal residence exemption at the time of application and approval of the initial special use permit, after which time the principal residence exemption is no longer required. So
it's-
that's the change.
and both the current law and the proposed new law are really quite restrictive. The chances of somebody building a duplex or a 2-unit construction and then making half of that their home, to me, is very, very unlikely. With the new law or without the new law, to me, duplexes are dead in the water.
Just to clarify, this doesn't apply to 2-family dwellings, and the ordinance amendment that you just set a public hearing on would eliminate the principal residence exemption for 2-family dwellings that currently exists. I just want to be clear that those are two separate matters.
That wasn't clear.
Well, wait a minute, so for anybody that builds a duplex today, don't they have to live in it at the time that it's built? Or if they
Yes,
take a home and they make a home into 2 units, doesn't,
Yes.
under the proposed law, that at the time of that request, at least one part of that has to be principal residence. No,
No.
you better explain it to me again then. I'm not sure I understand it.
so the previous ordinance that you set a public hearing on, text change 03, changes the minimum square footage for a 2-family unit from 600 square feet to 1,000 square feet,
Okay,
and it eliminates the principal residence exemption requirement in its entirety. The entire section is eliminated. Text change
Okay.
04
okay,
that is before you that we're on discussion now deals with accessory dwelling units. And this requires that for an accessory dwelling unit, the property it must qualify for a principal residence exemption for property taxes at the time that application and approval are determined at the outset.
Okay.
So, Mr. Kostreva, so if you applied to have an accessory dwelling unit in the rear yard of your principal residence, you would qualify. If you applied to do it at a home that you owned as a rental property, you would not qualify.
got it. Thank you for that explanation.
No problem.
I do think that the public will be slightly confused if we put these both through at the same time. I'm not saying they shouldn't both go through, but I'm wondering if we might want to stagger them so that we deal with one issue and then the other at at a different meeting. Just a thought, even if anybody, I mean, we have to assume that people are gonna come and participate, even though that hasn't been happening over the last year, but we have to assume that people would be, and they don't have the insight that we do, having talked about it a couple times and read it thoroughly.
What I can offer to do at the public hearing is to prepare a presentation that will graphically depict the ordinances independently and together. I would offer that it may be beneficial to have the public hearings at the same time, because folks with interest in one may have interest in both. So while I agree that these are complicated issues, I think that we can certainly address the nature of that confusion or uncertainty through the public hearing process by providing a better overview of what's proposed and clarifying it as we go through the process. I would also just remind you all that this would be the second of 4 meetings at which these text changes would be discussed before the public. So there'll be additional opportunities for the public to ask questions and provide feedback even beyond the Planning Commission public hearing, should additional questions or comments arise.
So, and I'm glad that distinction was made, because I completely missed it. You can't actually build a new dwelling on your property for rental purposes under this change?
Can.
Because the rules for outbuildings is very strict.
So let me back way up again where we were a few months ago at work sessions. So from 1971 until 2018, the city did not permit accessory dwelling units. An accessory dwelling unit is not a shed or a garage, but it's basically a second house, a smaller house. It's accessory to the principal house, typically located either in the backyard, over the garage, or it may be a mother-in-law type suite attached to the house. It's subsidiary to the principal dwelling. We have a lot of examples around town of these. Until 2018, they were all legal non-conforming dwellings because they'd been illegal since 1971. With the 2018 code update, accessory dwelling units became legal again under the conditions included in the ordinance for special use in the CD3L and CD3 districts. In the CD4 district, these are permitted by right. So these conditions don't apply. If you seek to create a new accessory dwelling unit, it would need to be on a property that has a principal resident, qualifies for principal residence exemption, and that principal residence exemption would have to continue to exist in perpetuity in order for both units to be utilized on the property under the current special use permit criteria. The proposed amendment would simply say the property has to qualify for principal residence exemption when the applicant applies to the Planning Commission and when the Planning Commission approves the special use permit at the initial application. If 20 years down the road, the applicant comes to the Planning Commission to change the accessory dwelling unit, that principal residence exception doesn't apply. It only has to apply there, because right now, if I go and apply, if I go to Isabel Bank and say I'd like a loan for an accessory dwelling unit for my mother to move into and have a principal residence exemption on my house, great, I qualify under the special use permit criteria. But the lender's going to say, what happens when you sell? What happens if you die? What happens if you move and keep the property and rent it? And I'm going to tell them, well, if that happens, then either my house or my accessory unit has to remain vacant under the terms of my special use permit. And I don't want to put words in the mouth of any individual bank, so I probably shouldn't have used a specific example, but they're likely going to say, well, that's going to hurt your resale value. It's going to be hard to appraise this project out. So this will have the effect of essentially saying, if I'm developer A and I own 15 rental properties in Mount Pleasant, I can't come to the Planning Commission and look to add an accessory unit in the backyard of every single one of those. Because that's the principal concern I've heard about the provision allowing them. But what it would do is it would say, all of you who own a home, if you decide I'm getting older, I'd like something smaller I can move into. I have a high school age student who's going to go to CMU who I'd like to keep close, but let them have their own space. If I have an aging parent who's going to need support, if I would like some extra income to help my family, this would become a conduit to do that. And I would not be tied into that in perpetuity.
Well stated.
We'll have to pull the tape up next month.
Well, and
So we can hear it again, yes.
Just in case I can't repeat the performance.
there are rules about how much of your property can be covered by anything.
Correct. Yeah, there's still limitations on this, but I would tell you you all know there's a number of these around the city. These have been they're not as prominent in our newer neighborhoods, but in the core parts of the community, from Bellows to Pickard, from really Bradley Street over to Isabella Road, there's dozens of these accessory dwelling units that already exist in our community and that are, for the most part, a good contribution, a charming contribution to the neighborhood. And a lot of communities around the country have been encouraging the development of new accessory dwelling units for some of the reasons I outlined and for some of the concerns that Commissioner Kostreva articulated earlier, that it provides an opportunity for people who, the 2,500 square foot home that made sense when they were young and had kids in the house. Maybe they want to stay in their neighborhood, but maybe staying in their neighborhood and staying in a big house is not feasible financially or in terms of care and energy and everything else. So an accessory dwelling unit can be a great option for folks in that situation to let them stay in their neighborhood, but it's stay in a neighborhood in a way that makes sense for them.
Can accessory dwelling units only be in single family homes? Or do they all, can duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes build those in
No.
the CD3 and 3L neighborhoods? We'll just narrow it.
Great question. No, essentially that would become a 3-family dwelling at that point. So it's an accessory dwelling because it's accessory to a principal dwelling unit, one unit, single unit. So the 2-family dwellings and accessory dwellings are separate,
Okay.
non-overlapping uses under the code.
And then the second question, is there a size limit on what an accessory dwelling unit can be?
Indirectly, yes. So the accessory dwelling unit special use criteria require that the unit have at least 400 square feet, but that it not exceed 1,000 square feet. Because again, these are supposed to be subsidiary to a principal use. So that word accessory means that it's something that would have some significant difference in scale from the principal use of the property.
So Commissioner Kostreva's concern about not having enough smaller properties for older people is out the window. As long as you build an accessory and you don't attach it to the house, then it can be small.
An accessory unit could be attached to the house as well, Commissioner Daly. So this doesn't require that it be a separate building. So if it was an accessory unit, like for a mother-in-law suite, those are often attached to the home. It might be over the garage or at the rear of the garage as a secondary unit with its own access and full separation on the interior from the principal unit.
And isn't that the way that most of the time we see that somehow there's a familial connection there? It's a grandmother or somebody, and there is a direct connection into the house. They're not truly separate building. They're not connected. They're connected to the home is the way we see them. But I thank you for telling me that they can be both connected to the home and not connected to the home. They can be separate and apart from the home as long as they meet all the other requirements. Is that okay?
That's correct. And we have examples of both around the community.
Yeah.
The public is never going to understand this. I'm ready to go home right now.
Well,
it's not any more complicated than the current rule, really.
Yeah.
I was blissfully unaware of it.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Kane should play his tape over and over again. He explained it so cogently. And we want to see that again and again and again.
That's the first time I've ever been accused of being cogent, so thank you.
No, I actually understood it when you were talking about it, and it can be easily lost because of its complexity. But as long as you keep it simple, that's a key to understanding this.
Well, that's the reason we've had this on 2 work session agendas, and then this will be through 2 meetings, regular meetings, is both so that you all understand it thoroughly, so the public has a chance to understand it thoroughly, and so that I can get it right for you.
So I'd like to move to set a public hearing on text change 2104 at our July 1st, 2021 regular meeting.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Leash? I'm sorry, Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rice?
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to discuss amendment to section 154-410 B4 and table 154-410A of the zoning ordinance to add multiple family dwellings as a special use to the CD3 character district and to establish special use permit criteria for that use. And consider setting a public hearing on this at the July 1st, 2021 regular meeting. Mr. Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, you'll be relieved to know this one's very simple and straightforward. So bear with me. This is probably the most complicated of the 3. So perhaps I should have slotted this in as text change number 3 so that we tackled it first. You'll recall, as part of our conversation at the last 2 work sessions, we discussed opportunities to create some incentives to address a limited set of circumstances with housing in the CD3 zoning district. These are circumstances where we may have existing non-conforming residential uses like rooming dwellings or multiple family dwellings in the CD3 district, or circumstances where we have blighted or obsolete properties within the district to create an incentive structure to see those properties be rehabilitated. Generally speaking, with the goal of trying to reduce the level of nonconformance of the property and bring it into good repair and really turn the property into an asset in the neighborhood. And so this proposed amendment would add multiple family dwellings as a special use in the CD3 character district if certain criteria are met, and these criteria are meant to be very limiting. So the intention here is to create a very limited set of circumstances in which a multiple family dwelling special use permit might be appropriate after consideration by the Planning Commission. Those are outlined in the ordinance. I'm happy to go through each for discussion or to take questions from you on the generalities of it. But again, the intention is to help to transition some of those existing non-conforming uses into uses that are conforming family uses, and to assist with the rehabilitation or replacement of vacant, blighted, or obsolete dwellings within the district. So again, I think we're fortunate. We definitely have more properties in the city that would fall into camp number 1 of existing non-conforming uses than camp number 2, vacant, blighted, or obsolete. I think that's we're very lucky that that's the case in our community, but we certainly do have properties that are in that second bucket. And so this is just an opportunity to create a new redevelopment tool to stimulate investment and improvement in our community and to hopefully improve the quality of life in our neighborhoods.
Any input anyone wants to make on this?
We'll move that we set a public hearing on text change 2105 at the July 1st. Somebody want to speak?
I second.
Oh, okay.
Any further discussion on this one? Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly?
No.
Commissioner Friedrich?
Aye.
Commissioner Honig?
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva?
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman?
Aye.
Commissioner Rise.
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion passes 5-1.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next item on the agenda is staff report. Mr. Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have two public hearings we're anticipating for from applicants in July. We have an application to modify the terms of a special use permit for one of our medical marijuana provisioning centers and adult use retailers that's open and operating. They're looking to adjust their hours of operation, extend those beyond the hours that are currently permitted under their special use permits. We are also anticipating an application for the reconstruction of a parking lot at a bank with drive-through in the city. And we will have 3 public hearings based on your actions tonight regarding your text changes. At this time, given that July 1st is the week before the holiday, I am not intending to include a work session with your July meeting unless there's a significant consensus in the alternate. We'll take a month off and let you folks get to your holiday, and we'll resume with our work session schedule as planned in August. So also, we do have one administrative review to report, which was for Jrank Electric at 1993 Glover Parkway. They are expanding their outdoor storage area, which is at the east side of their building, between their building and US 127, with a gravel outdoor storage area that'll be fully screened to allow them to increase their storage capacity on property. So that's all I've got for this month.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. And then there's an administrative review report.
Yep, that's what I just covered.
Oh,
The Jrank project.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
I heard you, but blanked out. If someone would like to make a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Kane, will you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
Commissioner Friedrich.
Aye.
Commissioner Honig.
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva.
Aye.
Commissioner Ortman.
Aye.
Commissioner Leash. I'm sorry, what am I doing? Commissioner Rise.
Aye.
I'm really struggling with that tonight. Madam Chair, we are adjourned to work session.
Okay, and does anyone need a break before we go to work session?
No, let's go to work session
Okay, now starting the work session. Mr. Kane.
because the sun is still up.
Perfect. So we've got 2 items tonight. I don't know, given our relatively low attendance this evening, if the Planning Commission wants to entertain a deep discussion on one or both of these topics, particularly because I know Commissioner Kingsworthy had a strong interest in the green infrastructure discussion. So would be sorry for him to miss that conversation. But our first item is on green infrastructure. When we discussed possible work session topics back in February, there was general interest in discussing green infrastructure. The idea, the topic of green infrastructure is extremely broad. And so I provided 2 what I thought were pretty concise snapshots, one regarding green infrastructure and the other regarding low impact development, which is sort of the same thing in a lot of ways, just to give you all some background on what those concepts relate to. In February, we didn't get into too much detail about what might be desired in terms of that discussion. So I wanted to provide that material to see if that stimulated any thoughts or ideas on what you might want to discuss. I'm happy to discuss our ordinance's treatment of green infrastructure at the present, if there's any questions about that. Otherwise, I would also welcome the opportunity to defer additional conversation to our August work session, if you'd like additional time to think that through, and we can go from there.
And move to defer.
I second that.
Right. I don't think we don't need to take action on that. I just need to see that there's consensus in that.
I would agree on deferring to August. Yeah.
Having read through what you sent us, though, I thought for the green infrastructure one, would it be helpful to have somebody from Parks there? Because it seems like a lot of that revolved around forestry and the what we do with the parks and how many trees we leave and stuff like that. Do you think that would be helpful for us to have someone there from Parks?
Yeah, I can certainly inquire and see if we can have somebody join us for the work session. I will tell you, to your point, I think one of the unique things about Mount Pleasant is that while we have this amazing water resource in our community, we're lucky and we can perhaps be a little bit less attentive to the environment than other communities because our river is so well protected by our park system that we don't have a tremendous amount of development occurring in our floodplain or along the river. And so other communities may have some more immediate concern areas where it comes to zoning and in the environment because of greater proximity of development to that infrastructure. So, but yes, so I think that I agree that would be a wonderful idea to have somebody here who might be able to answer any questions you have about the city's approach through the Parks Department on environmental issues. Our second topic tonight is the Planning Commission bylaws. So we're going way back to December of 2019. There was, staff had recommended that the Planning Commission consider updating your bylaws. Our bylaws date back to 1985 with several updates up to 2008. 2008 is the last time the bylaws were reviewed by the Planning Commission in any meaningful way. We also have been operating under a separate rules of procedure document that was adopted in 2005 and also has not been updated since 2009. Commissioners Honig and Leash volunteered to assist. I worked with the city attorney in conversation to see what they might recommend that we consider. Since the last amendment to our bylaws, we have both a new zoning ordinance in the city as well as the state of Michigan's operating under new planning and zoning laws. And given the fact that our bylaws were as old as they are, the city attorney recommended that we start with a clean version of the bylaws. I'll just throw out from my perspective, we're required by law to have bylaws for our planning commission. I think we're fortunate that we don't often need to reference them. And I think that you often find that you're referencing your bylaws when there's strife or disagreement on your planning commission, or when you're faced with a lawsuit or some other ramification because of a decision or action that's done by the planning commission that may not be sound or may not be perceived as being sound. So I think the fact that we've been able to let the bylaws sit for 13 years, while I wouldn't recommend it as our ongoing best practice, I think it reflects that we've had a good track record over this past decade plus of the bylaws not having to be as relevant to our work because there has been a good rapport amongst the several planning commissioners who've come and gone during that time period. Commissioner Kostreva, perhaps you were here when those were last updated. I don't know. It'd be darn close.
The one thing I did notice in here is that no kind of term limits are mentioned in here, and I guess that was very noticeable. Other than that, it looked like a very fine rewrite of the bylaws.
Great. Well, I will tell you the term limits are covered in the city charter.
Yeah.
So fortunately or unfortunately, the planning commission won't have discretion or purview on that. This is, we started with a template from the attorney and then looked to, as best as we could, make that consistent both with the existing bylaws that we have an adoption as well as our practices, which, as you can imagine, over time, sometimes the bylaws and practices can meander from each other. The goal here was simple, keeping it to the things that are required by law, keeping it to the things that are essential for good practices as a commission, making sure that it was consistent with our practices, and really not looking to make any major changes. I would hope that the new format will be easier for the planning commission to use, and that if we are in a situation where consultation of the bylaws is required, that will this will make that a better for everybody, better for staff, better for you as commissioners to be able to utilize these bylaws and to understand everybody's kind of rights and responsibilities on the commission. So really all I'm looking for tonight is either, if you would like to defer to future, I'm okay with that. We've certainly this doesn't have to be done overnight. If there's general consensus that you're comfortable with the draft as presented, I would look to bring it to your July meeting for discussion and consideration for adoption as the new bylaws. So just that's kind of where we're at. And then obviously any questions or comments that you all might have on them.
I'm comfortable with it as written.
I'm comfortable with it as well.
I'm comfortable with it as well.
As am I.
Great job, Leslie.
Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Rise, do you have any questions, concerns, comments?
Commissioner Daly, you're muted, so we didn't hear whatever you said.
I was making a bunch of extraneous noise.
Noted.
It's fine to go ahead with these bylaws. Thank you.
I guess it's settled, then we don't need to do motion or,
Nope, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss and ask questions, and this would be presented under new business at your July meeting for consideration of adoption.
okay.
And that's all I've got for everybody tonight.
Motion to adjourn?
I will second.
Do we need a roll call vote, Mr. Kane?
Let's just do it. It's been easy tonight with only 6 of you, so although I keep messing it up, but Commissioner Daly,
Yes.
Commissioner Friedrich,
Aye.
Commissioner Honig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kostreva,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rice.
Affirmative.
I got the last one right. Everybody have a wonderful month.
Okay,
We'll
thank
see
you.
See you July 1st.
Thank you, thank you.
Aye.